We're back! Kingdom Come 2 comes out in like a few days now, and I just had to squeeze one last video out of its predecessor before we all leave it forever for greener pastures. And for this last video, I wanted to see if it was possible to beat Kingdom Come Deliverance with the wooden training sword. Now, a dude named Milk Bottle has already completed this challenge before me, but he did so on normal difficulty. However, I enjoy the pain and suffering I put myself through the challenges I end up doing, and so I saw an opportunity here. Since I really only ever play this game on hardcore mode with all negative perks applied anymore, I figured that this was my opportunity to take this challenge and push it to the limit. And so, without further ado, let's start this challenge run by first establishing some rules. Rule number 1 is to complete Kingdom Come Deliverance by only inflicting damage via the wooden training sword, not including the single smack it takes to obtain said weapon. And rule 2 is to play on hardcore mode with all negative perks. Now, with those out of the way, we can begin our run, starting out in Skalitz, being awoken by our mother after another late night. And after not being able to see my options to answer her question, I accidentally chose the one that increased my speech. Since I really wanted both of my free stats to go into strength, I restarted once again and was actually given my prompts this time. After grabbing my free levels, I went about collecting all the things that Father requested of me, starting with picking up the crossguard from the castle, then talking to Veshek to get him walking to the arena, then made my way over to Kunesh's to tell them that if he didn't give me the tools back, I was going to tell my dad on him. I then went over to throw doo-doo at Deutsch's house with my friends, practice sword fighting with Veshek, then lastly getting some cold ale for Father from Bianca. And as much as Father likes to drink, I like to play video games. And with any hobby, there comes a cost. That's where today's sponsor, Instant Gaming, comes in. These guys are here to save you money on games. From games as old as Skyrim to as new as Kingdom Come 2, there's plenty of deals to choose from on their site. In my last video, I showed you just how easy it is to purchase and redeem games from Instant Gaming, and ever since then, I've gone on to add even more games to my ever-growing backlog. Some of these games have been on my Steam wishlist for like months now, as I was just waiting for a good deal to come by. But with Instant Gaming, it's just that. Instant. Instant deals, instant savings, and instant redemption. If you're interested in grabbing a good deal on some of the most popular games, feel free to click the link in the description, even if it is just to browse around. And I'm sure you'll even find a good deal on your own wishlisted games. Anyway, thank you again to Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to Skalitz and see what Henry's up to. Now, while I'm training with Veshek, instead of doing the chain strikes as intended, I would instead relentlessly continue swinging so I could squeeze out an extra level in my sword and warfare skills. After finishing my chores and returning to Father, we finished up Radzig's swords and presented it to him as he came to visit, with Henry putting on a stunning display of foreshadowing, as this is how he's going to look for the majority of this run. Sadly, shortly after this, Skalitz would get invaded and Henry's parents would be slaughtered. But that's okay, because he's able to sneak out the back door and save himself and Radzig's sword, sprinting his way down the hill and onto the closest horse, riding all the way into Talmberg, almost dying from a loss of blood. Actually, I did a few times before this, but those don't count. Hell, I didn't even need to show you that, and you would have never known. Once I'd arrived safely in Talmberg, I had my wounds treated and I was able to tell them about what happened in Skalitz, and thankfully they'd take me in as a refugee and take care of me. Which they'd likely regret since Henry was like, always starving. After eating most of their hot soup and taking everything else that wasn't nailed down or classified as stolen, I was finally able to give Henry a proper rest. Well, I'd hoped to do so. Lady Stephanie had other plans. She couldn't wait to hear about the morbid tales from Skalitz and woke me just 2 hours into my much-needed slumber. Dick move. I refused to tell her anything as I was still in shock and processing it myself. Plus, that was hella rude of her. After trying to get some shut-eye once again, I found out that it wasn't possible in this fucking town. Something happened in the dead of night, which led Robard to waking me up in the middle of the night to welcome the rest of the Skalitz survivors, as well as tasking you with watching over these battlements for the rest of the night. Damn it, man, can't I just sleep? After waiting till morning and becoming even more sleep-deprived, I'd now find myself beside Sir Divish having a meeting with a man leading the army who I'd just watched slaughter everything that I'd ever loved. Fueled with rage, I demanded to go back to Skalitz and at least bury my parents, but after being denied my wishes and told to keep put and remain safe, I wiggled through a hole in the boundaries, now free to sprint my way back to Skalitz. Once I got back into Skalitz, sneaking by any looters along my route, I found my parents' bodies, then went looking around for a spade to bury them. The barking dog caught my attention and got me interested in checking out what was causing him to do this, and there I'd run into my old pal Zbyszek. You know, the kid who once stood for justice, now he was here looting corpses. Nice dude. After having a chat with him, I was able to secure the spade, then go about robbing the man that the dog was supposedly guarding. I guess he was okay if I did it. Once I had my spade, I went over to go dig up some treasure that I knew I'd find buried under the dovecot, then went about burying my parents. After saying my piece and heading back out of Skalitz, I'd come across a gang of men, probably coming here to raid the place for its scraps. Their leader was much larger than me and threatened to take my sword from me, and as it was the last memento I have of my father, I wasn't going to let him have it that easy. But with one simple smack on my head, he'd scar me with a lifelong trauma of CTE. Before he could seal my fate alongside my parents, I'm surprisingly saved by none other than a woman. Fuck, Henry's never going to live this down. During my recovery, I'm tortured with nightmares of that fateful day, being forced to walk around in the sequence that was ripped straight out of the first Max Payne. Finally recovering enough to open my eyes, I'm greeted by the woman who saved me, looking as if she hadn't bathed since she did so. Jesus, go wash yourself. After thanking her for saving me, as well as the miller for housing me, I was now off to the castle in Ratai to reconnect with Radzig and tell him about how I lost his sword. Also to see about joining his guard so I could grow up to be a big strong man and maybe, one day take back what was stolen from me. So to prove my worth, I'm given a shot to do so and tasked with heading to the training grounds to show Bernard what I already knew about sword fighting, only to go over the basics once again. But I can't complain since this was all giving me some much needed experience, though not much. Before meeting up with Bernard, I decided to catch a few Z's by locating someone else's bed to sleep in, finding one in none other than the inn. Since I was resting during the day, no one came up to stop me, so I was able to replenish much of my severely drained energy, even though I'd just been resting for God knows how long. After sleeping a few hours and regaining most of my energy, I was now ready to train. However, it was now nighttime, and Bernard was no longer at the training grounds. But spending some of my newly earned energy credits, I waited around for some daylight to then learn how to be a man. Once he was confident in my abilities, he then moved on to teach me how to perfect block, dodge, and feint, with Sir Hans rudely interrupting my training session to pull Bernard away for some archery lessons. Dickhead. This led me to having to participate in the archery lesson myself, but I purposefully don't put forth much effort and I'm not doing any damage to anyone, so it's all good and doesn't count as failing the run. After Hans and I finished our archery competition, I found that I took a historically low but historically accurate score. He then challenged me to a sword fight to see if I'd learned anything from earlier, proving to him that I didn't and possibly getting him to second guess Bernard as a trainer. Sorry, but the swords we were fighting with were made of metal, so I couldn't use them. After that embarrassing display of sword work, though not my worst, I'm told to report to the bailiff to join their guard and acquire the first task of my new position. Once I'm officially part of the bailiff's crew, I'm finally given my first set of real armor, as well as a few weapons I'm not able to use. After I was suited up, I was off to meet the Nightingale around noon so we could walk around the town doing our rounds and solving everyone's petty disputes, handling them with the kind of tact you'd expect from a kid like Henry. After our walk around town, the two of us settled into the tavern to drink until nightfall, leading me to wonder why we yelled at that guard earlier for doing the exact same thing. Now that the sun was down, curfew had hit, and so Nightingale tasked me with ringing the bell outside the Rathaus. And after ringing the bell 3 times and heading up to ensure the closure of the Trader's Tavern, I'm once again confronted by the ever-entitled Hans, leading to yet another easy dub for him, as I'm currently still a pacifist. After the fight, if you could call it that, is broken up by Hanush and the tavern is closed, I sought refuge, once again, in someone else's bed, only to get just a few more precious hours of sleep before hunting with Hans in the morning. Come morning, I met with Hans, choosing not to follow him at all since I know where I'm going and he's an asshole. However, on my way to the hunting camp, I did stop off in Neuhof to rub a horse. This way I could get there much quicker. But this only made things worse since Henry was nearly starving and I'd still need to wait for Hans to arrive. Luckily, I found plenty of food stashed in the trunk at camp.
What the dog doing?
After fetching Hans's bacon and wine from his horse's bag like the good little boy that I am, we went on to exchange some pleasantries before heading off to bed and sleeping till morning. Once I'd slept for a few hours, I'd wake up in an unfamiliar place. Definitely no longer at camp with Hans. Confused as to what happened during my slumber, I ended up stumbling around the woods for a few hours, using any new landmarks to guide me back to camp. Upon arrival, Henry felt a bit hungry. However, it was still many hours until dawn, so I ended up needing to wait even longer, thus becoming even hungrier, albeit manageably.
Could do with a bite to eat.
Once dawn had arrived, I'd pick some mushrooms and Hans would challenge me to a hunting competition, seeing who of us could bag more rabbits. Well, I can't use a bow, nor do I really want to participate, so I just ended up waiting some more, and possibly waiting far longer than I actually needed to. Eventually heading back to camp and meeting with Hans to compare our results. Apparently, he's just as bad as someone who wasn't even trying. Yikes. After all this waiting and a further few more hours of sleep, Henry was now starving. However, now Hans was demanding that we hunt a damn boar. And so I consumed the only thing I had on me with any nourishing value: spirits. Now that I was drunk as a skunk and getting drunker by the minute, I followed Hans to the place where we'd find ourselves a herd of boar. He manages to draw his bow and hit it dead on in the location of its vitals, but the shot doesn't end up killing it. This led to him leaving us to take off after it. Thankfully, I still have my stolen horse, so the time it took to find him was greatly reduced. Once I find the camp of the bandits that Hans was captured by, I'm able to sneak into the camp, cut him loose, and get out without them even knowing, all while still pretty drunk. The two of us limped our way back to Rattay, arriving in one piece, finally giving Henry the chance to sleep again. As if that hasn't been like 20% of what I've been doing already this whole run, but whatever. After the cutscenes had passed and I was back in control of a still drunk Henry, I was now off to be inducted into Bernard's troop and given my very own horse. There was some commotion happening in Neuhof, and so we were off to investigate what happened there. I met a boy named Ginger who'd I'd questioned about the events that transpired, and after doing so, heading off to Ujas to finally get my hands on my weapon. The only way of obtaining a wooden training sword outside of any combat training instance is to either A, use console commands and spawn it in, or B, get it from Father Godwin. The method of obtaining it from Father Godwin is by first heading to Ujits, then whacking him with any weapon. Do not attempt to use your fists. Doing so will make him put the sword away, and it needs to be in his hands for this to work. Unfortunately, this was the one and only time I'm allowed to use any weapon outside of the wooden training sword, as A, I'm not killing him, and B, it's the only way. Though I did attempt to use the closest thing I could find to a wooden sword, the basic bludgeon. After giving Father a solid whack and then leading him to a nearby field, I began ramming him with my horse until he surrendered. The first time I got him to surrender, I had no idea where he dropped the sword, as I didn't know he'd done so until I saw him running away from me. So I did have to reload a save to do this all over again, and it was an annoyingly long process. This second time, I paid much more attention, keeping a close eye on him to see where and when he would drop his sword and run away. Once I'd obtained my new weapon, I traveled back to Neuhof to first take care of the two bandits hiding in the woods just north of here, and second, inquire more about Ginger, as he's now missing. I was able to defeat the armed bandit with the help of a nearby wandering guard, and the other guy, well, I guess I don't have any honor. After getting some info from his friend Jacob, I was off to talk to the charcoal burners and begin this long line of questioning to find Ginger. Just kidding. I rode Pebbles straight to the broken down shack he'd sought refuge within and questioned him even further about what he really knew, leading me to a man with a limp in Ujits, but not before going back to tell Radzig and Robard what I'd learned. Once I'd made it to Ujits, I found that Limpy Lubash, the man I was looking for, had been murdered inside his own house with a huge crowd gathered around outside to spectate. After questioning a few of the gathered townsfolk and being pointed toward the priest, I went up the hill to talk to him, only to find out that it's the same man I just fought for his sword moments ago. Ironically, we sat down after a few drinks that night, and by morning, it was like it never even happened. Water under the bridge. Come morning though, Father Godwin was still drunk off his ass, and so he leaned on me, literally, to give the day's sermon, offering to tell me what he knew in exchange for doing so. After giving the best damn sermon he could have ever asked for, I was awarded with some pretty abysmal information from the father, but information nonetheless. Some dude in Ledechko named Riki was my next lead, and I hope to God that he had some good info for me. After many hours within this game's slice of Bohemia, I knew exactly where to find him, no questions asked. Hiding out in a cave just northeast of Ledechko. I don't owe this Riki dude anything, and I don't want to risk my life to save him, so squeezing all the information I could from him, I left him with the two bandits who'd found his little hiding spot just moments after me. Now I was headed off to the windmill to find our fourth and final character in this storyline, Timmy. After conning Merca out of the information by promising his safety, I immediately give Timmy up to the band of fierce-looking bandits also looking for him. I followed these men out to where Timmy was located, hoping to help them out and collect the second half of my reward, and after the murder, I caught back up with Moorcock. Wait, this dude's name is Moorcock? Man, the jokes just write themselves these days. I caught back up with him, collected my reward, and was able to get the location of the base of operations for this gang of bandits wreaking havoc on smaller towns in the area, acting like I have the moral high ground, as if I didn't rip Neuhoff off earlier by stealing one of their horses. I made it to Radzig's mobile camp that was located just outside of Merhoya to inform him about all the things that I just found out. He then asked me to go to their camp, since I'd already infiltrated their trust, and find out what I could about their operation. Before doing all that, and now that I was back in Ratai, I went to train with Robard, learning everything that he was willing to teach me, all the way up to Master Strokes. Then sparring with him a bit longer, trying to level my strength all the way up to 8 so I could invest in the perk Headcracker, since it's likely the only chance I have at beating Runt with this shit-ass weapon. Also grabbing Boar in hopes that I could use it to my advantage as well. In the main level stat tree, I grabbed the perk Burger for even more added strength, as well as earlier I'd grabbed Clinchmaster in hopes that I'd be able to outmuscle Runt and deplete his stamina, and possibly through these clinches even knocking him in the head a few times. Once I felt satisfied with my stats, I set off to Privislavitz to case the joint. Then, before leaving, I lit their arrows on fire and ran like hell back to Radzig's camp. I then got back to Radzig with the news and told him what we needed to prepare for. Then off to Talmberg to ask Sir Divish for help and beginning trial by fire. I stormed the once abandoned town, now armed with a full army ahead of me, and I watched as our men took down our opposition with relative ease, getting Henry to sneak in a good couple whacks to knock our enemies off balance and give my allies the advantage. As we tore through the camp, I made sure to loot anyone who looked like they had some nice heavy gear on them, since it'd be nice to have as much padding as possible for the upcoming duel. All was going well until we pushed up to the church and broke inside. Now it was me versus Runt. This first attempt had me spending a solid 5 minutes on it, master stroking my way into good positions to whack him upside his helmet, trying to break down his armor and hopefully proc the Headcracker perk. Unfortunately, I'd get a bit too cocky around this 5-minute mark, and he managed to wear me down, lay a pretty sick combo move on me, and take me out for good. However, I wasn't fazed. I picked myself up, dusted off my Waffenrock, and tried again. But not before going back to Ratai and purchasing a few key potions from the apothecary. I snagged a Lazarus, Artemisia, Aqua Vitalis, Buck's Blood, and a couple digestive potions, as well as a hair of the dog to round it all out and slap the alcoholic out of me. This cocktail I've used in the past to get the upper hand on Runt, but back then I was still only able to take him out with a bow and arrow, and a wooden sword is a much different story. For a total of 33.28 minutes, roughly, I sat there dodging, punching him in the face, whacking him upside the head with my sword, all to no avail. This guy just wasn't taking the hint. After this fierce and grueling battle with Runt still not budging, I went into my inventory to check on how my armor was holding up, since I'd taken my fair share of hits in the past half hour. So, while most of my exterior armor was dead and gone, I still had some decent health left on my coif and halberd. However, my sword, well, that was quite a different story. It was at a critical 0%. My sword, with already abysmal stats, now only was capable of doing no more than 1 damage per hit, I think. This battle was over. Now, after a few real-life days had passed, I couldn't stop thinking about how I could possibly get through this fight. I knew if I could just get past him that the rest of this run would be cake. I harnessed all my pondering efforts into the possibility of outclassing Runt. Maybe with better stats, I could use Clinchmaster more to my advantage, and hell, even possibly do more damage with my pitiful weapon? I don't know, the damage values and equations in this game are pretty vague. Anyway, if I were to increase my stats, what would that magic number be? And furthermore, which stats would be the best to invest in? Well, honestly, it'd probably be best to at least level up the big 3, strength, vitality, and agility. But doing this, even by a few more levels, would take quite a bit of time, especially if I can only use a wooden sword. Also, what if I do go through all that trouble, only to find out it's not even possible? This dread loomed over me, and I wanted to find the solution to my problem, so I did the unthinkable. I cheated. Yes, I know, sacrilege. But my choices were to either end the run here or cheat and find out. And I bet you're just as curious. So anyway, through the power of console commands, I maxed out the big 3, bringing my main level up in the process. I invested in all the perks I could possibly ever need, then began, once again, our Siege of Priv. Oh, and I also spawned in a brand new wooden training sword, so I'd have every chance to maximize my damage ceiling. After sieging the town again, getting some pretty decent gear this time, I made my way back to run. In the split second I have right before the fight, I'd also open up my inventory to chug my cocktail of potions, even though some of them wouldn't really even do a whole lot anymore, regardless. Upon entering combat with Runt, I found out rather quickly that Runt beats you in clinches no matter what your level is. If I'm the clinch master, he's the clinch god. After a solid 15 minutes of rigorous combat and many blows to this dude's head, he wasn't going down. If only I could check to see how much damage, if any, I'm doing to his helmet. Unfortunately, even cheats can't tell me that. So, after all this, I was still unable to defeat Runt in battle with just a wooden training sword, proving that Runt, in hardcore mode at least, is just purely an unfair fight, as a nearly max level Henry wasn't able to beat him with this thin hunk of wood. Okay, so this challenge run was a bit unique, as I usually wouldn't post my failed challenge runs, except for every one of my Cyberpunk runs, but I chose to go with this one anyway for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, I wanted to save anyone the trouble for trying this out themselves, and this acts as kind of their PSA. And secondly, because I'd put so much time into this run that it felt like a waste if I just deleted it. But also because sometimes it's okay to fail. Though, don't get used to it, bucko. This is a rare occurrence and won't be a regular schmegular thing. Capiche? Anywho, treat yourself to a game with the link below, enter in for your chance at a free game, and I'll see y'all in the next one.